The train crew would like to welcome passengers who have just joined us on this intercity to Horb, Böblingen, Stuttgart, and wishes you a pleasant journey.
Nächster Halt.
Also da es gibt ja viele Leute, die die Medien mögen. Jedenfalls, wenn sie über einen berichten, ja.
Okay. Ja, du bist ein mächtiger Mann dadurch.
Ja, eben nicht, oder? Weil die Medien, die finden ja das gar nicht so wichtig. Oder sie
Doch, die
sie
Medien
behaupten
sind viel
es.
wichtiger, als sie es wahrnehmen.
Das ist klar, aber das CERN-Loch finden die nicht so publizierbar.
Ja.
Und das stellt man sich natürlich auch wieder Fragen. Wieso denn eigentlich? Ich habe auch, also Kritik, ja, aber Kritik ist doch was Positives, sagt man immer. Da kann man ja was lernen.
Ja, aber die Wissenschaft ist ja nicht nur Wissenschaft, sie ist ja auch eben was Menschliches.
Ja, das
dadurch
ist so.
Ist sie ein bisschen schwach.
Ja, das Fleisch ist schwach, oder wie sagt man denn? Also Higgs zum Beispiel, der Herr Higgs, ja, der hat einen Nobelpreis gekriegt für seinen God-Partikel, nicht?
Ja.
Genau, das hat ihn wahrscheinlich auch gefreut, oder?
Mit Sicherheit.
Ja.
Ich hatte irgendwas über ihn gelesen, dass er sich kritisch gegen CERN geäußert hätte.
Aber erst nach dem Nobelpreis. Ja, ja, weil er hat jetzt schon einen. Zwei kann man nicht haben im gleichen,
aber
oder?
es ist nur,
und kann man die sammeln? Die Nobelpreise? Kann man mehrmals für das gleiche Nobelpreis?
Ah, jawohl.
Ja, gut. Siehst du, das ist ja auch lustig. Du hast mir einen Kommentar geschickt, den du geschrieben hast. Und ich habe mich dann nicht getraut zu beantworten, weil ich hab nichts verstanden. Also ich würde eine sehr schlechte Wissenschaftler abgeben, weil schon bei Einstein und das ergibt C, habe ich nicht genau gewusst, was denn C ergibt und so weiter. Und ich wollte da nicht so lange nachfragen, sonst denkst du, ich habe keine Ahnung, was hier steht.
Ich habe es besser verstanden als die Fachleute, das ist sicher.
Bist du sicher?
Ganz sicher.
Ja, das ist gut.
Nein, sondern es zeigt nur, wie absurd er für wie absurd er es hält.
Ach, trotzdem wird es aber publiziert. Ja. Ich habe ganz viele Artikel gelesen, da steht, der Hawkins denkt jetzt, das Universum kann kaputt gehen. Achtung und Warnung. Und dann, wenn man den Artikel ein bisschen weiter liest und auch dann stellt sich raus, dass das eben nur theoretisch ist. Irgendwie. Ja?
Ja, es ist eine Methode, die Aufmerksamkeit auf CERN zu lenken.
Also,
Er ist in Wirklichkeit ganz eng mit CERN.
das weiß ich. Ja, I welcome Professor Otto E. Roessler for this new interview about the danger at the CERN LHC, the Large Hadron Collider in Geneva. Welcome, Otto.
Welcome, Armin.
We're having this interview in exactly the same location we had the first interview a few years ago at the University of Tuebingen in Germany. And in these years between the two interviews, quite a few things happened. So we'd like to discuss these and a few new things and make a new point on the developments at the CERN LHC. Quite some years ago, Wagner and Sancho, Sancho is a scientist also, I think, and Wagner, yes, in the US,
Both.
Yeah, both, they have made a complaint at the court of Hawaii in order to stop the LHC. They lost. 2 years later, Gabriela Schroeder from Germany went up to the highest German court to stop the CERN LHC, and she lost. Then a complaint was made at the UN Human Rights Commission in Geneva and failed. The CERN LHC seems untouchable. You agree, Professor?
Yeah, that's the phenomenon, yes. And it's impressive, of course. Nothing imposes more than being unimpressible.
Exactly. Yeah. I remember I had when Louis Sancho and Wagner in the US, they made this complaint. We were in contact and they asked me to find a person. In the US there are these professions, I don't remember what they're called, but they bring court papers to a company in order to inform them that the complaint is happening against them. And in Geneva I found this similar person to the US, huissier it's called in Geneva. It's a kind of special lawyer with a special certification from the state, and he can do that theoretically. And I was quite impressed. I gave him 500 Swiss francs, and he said, yeah, I'll do it, it's interesting, and he found it himself quite interesting to do. And then, after he went there, we had a last meeting, and it was quite strange. He was very surprised, because usually he is given a kind of slight bit of respect in his work. But when he came to the CERN with the papers, I just said, no, go away. We don't need to let you in, we don't need to come out, we don't need to take these papers, goodbye, sir. And so yeah, this is another example, I think, of how untouchable they are.
Yeah, it's a state of its own.
Yes. I think they call it supranational.
It is on the same level as the UN.
Yes.
And both are very closely, they like each other, so to speak. And
why do they like each other? Because they're both international organizations?
Yeah, and it's automatic. I mean, it's such a small circle of high-ranking people, they have to like each other. Why not? Yes.
Yes. And could this be part of the attraction of the LHC, of the CERN, that it's so international, it's global, it's about peaceful, scientific experiments? And
the most beautiful science of all of them, namely physics.
Yeah.
And the people in physics are very well educated and very humble, usually, in their manners.
Yes.
So the whole thing is something very, very positive.
And you are not exactly as positive about this as they are. Why?
No, I would say science is wonderful, and it's great if one has a chance to be supported with doing something important. And CERN is lucky to have this status. And as long as they follow scientific principles, everything is fine. Only when they go beyond what science, the customs of science, one of them is openness, the other would be honesty. If for some reason one decides not to follow the usual standards of science, then the whole thing becomes a little bit hard to support, so to speak. And then, for example, if you are building a bridge in one of the countries of the West and of the East as well, you have to get certificates that this is safe, what you are doing.
Yes.
And very strangely, CERN, that this is about the only thing I would criticize with CERN, that they do not renew their 7-year-old safety report.
Well, even the 7-year-old safety report they did was done by their own staff.
Yeah. But
which is quite interesting. I mean, if I have a company and I want to assess the security, usually I get an external company that independently assesses this security.
Yeah, this would of course be possible, but it has not been done. But still, to have a safety report is much better than to have no safety report.
Yes.
And now this safety report is 7 years old. They are doubling their energies. they plan to double the energy very soon, maybe on the 8th of May, I was told this morning.
Yeah.
And in that case, before the 8th of May, CERN would be, according to international standards, be forced, or would be expected to, very humbly, to present a new safety report, which takes into account new results which were not available 7 years ago. For example, building the atomic bomb took less than 6 years. Yeah. Between the letter from Einstein to the American president and the final result, which made Einstein weep, that was only 6 years. So now we have 7 years where scientific progress is not being considered by CERN in the context of its new experiment, which is something very strange to the world. And that's essentially my only message, that I would like to see a written safety report in which CERN is disclaiming the dangers that have been presented scientifically in scientific publications in referee journals in the meantime.
But that report would have to be published and reviewed again by peer scientists, right?
Okay, yes, but you see, being afraid even of presenting a not quite clean report is even worse than having a not quite clean report.
I understand, yeah. On the other side, if I would be one of these 10,000s of scientists,
yes,
well paid, driving my bicycle in Geneva, mm-hmm, and making what I love most to do, scientific experiments,
yep,
I would be maybe also inclined to say, well, if there is anything that becomes dangerous to us, potentially, we won't go that way.
Not if you have signed a document which forces you to keep your mouth shut.
You think they have?
I mean, even German professors have to sign such documents. Why should CERN people not sign such documents?
Did you have to sign such a document?
I never did. That was my problem once.
Really?
Yeah.
It was your problem that you didn't want to sign a document to shut up?
No, it wasn't even shown to me. Sorry. Maybe I would have signed it if it had this level of fairness. So maybe CERN is more advanced in that respect.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I mean, it is true that over the years I've been interested and working on this subject. I've been always impressed by how can it be that so many scientists are on a project and not one of them shows some openness to criticism or to dangers that are possible, but they seem like a homogeneous group of people which all have the same voice and the same ideas and the same position.
Yeah, it's a very interesting sociological phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Or in another way put, if I look at something, also it is a controversial subject, but I would take this now as an example. If we look at whistleblowers like Edward Snowden or Julian Assange, we don't have that at the CERN. We have no whistleblowers, apart from you're a bit of a whistleblower in a certain way, because you're also part of the scientific community.
Yeah. I call myself the ship's boy on the big ship. What was the name? You know, the very big one, Titanic.
Well, you are the first ship's boy that is also co-founder of the chaos theory, because usually ship boys don't found chaos theories. I mean, while they're doing their work.
But one doesn't talk about younger children who sometimes have become saints in the Catholic Church. So even young people can be very high level at the same time.
I see. I see.
No, somehow this was not the right way to put it.
Also, my next question would be, do you still consider, I mean, when I did the last interview with you, maybe I have to backtrack a bit, I had quite a lot of media attention for this interview. You were also, I think, invited to 2-3 new interviews afterwards, one with RT. And there was one interesting long article actually in the register. It's an online publication in the UK, I believe, where the title was the CERN will explode the sun and the moon, and you were quoted in that interview because you said to me, one option which I would recommend would be to build the CERN LHC on the moon.
Yeah, which is very expensive, of course.
Which they say, actually that was interesting because it was actually discussed in some forums between some scientists, and they said it's not a bad option, but it's too expensive.
Yeah.
Do you still consider moving the LHC to the moon a viable alternative, Otto?
Yes, even though it would be so expensive that it would postpone the experiment for quite a few years. That's the price to pay, so to speak. Yeah.
Okay. And would you still consider that alternative also a safe alternative, based on the know-how you have?
Let us, the risk would be so much smaller that one could, that probably if one would take a vote on the planet would say, yes, we do it together.
Okay.
We shoulder it.
Okay. Now, Stephen Hawking, a very smart person, we all know, has...
We saw the movie, or at least,
Yes.
Yeah.
Has apparently also thinks now that the LHC is dangerous, but only if it has the size of the Earth.
Yeah.
Does this statement make any sense to you, Otto?
Yes, it is promoting CERN in the public consciousness of the planet.
Okay, so it's kind of advertisement for CERN.
Yeah.
Okay. Because interestingly, some media, I've read some articles that say like, Hawking says the CERN is dangerous, it could destroy the universe, and then when you read the whole article it says, yeah, but only if the CERN LHC has the size of the Earth.
Yeah.
So this is quite interesting.
It's an ingenious strategy, so to speak, if you are absolutely sure that there's no danger whatsoever involved, which is nice to see and to watch when people are so sure.
At our last interview, Otto, you said that you would be interested in having a discussion directly with Stephen Hawking.
Yeah.
Would you still be interested in that personally?
Very much so. I mean, I admire Stephen Hawking very much, and he happens to be a friend of a person whom I consider a friend in science.
Yeah.
And I know several persons who are quite close to him, and I have a very deep respect for him, and he plays the role of a saint nowadays, and I mean, everyone has to say he deserves it. I mean, he is one of the few people who have proven that their resilience and mental strength and probably also kindness is superhuman.
Yeah, I agree with that also. The only thing I would say is, I mean, he has made, I think, science, his areas of science much more popular to many people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Also by the books he wrote, by the interviews, by his apparitions. Yes, I mean, the only question would just be, is he too optimistic, too positive? Does he in general not see much danger? Because, I mean, I can understand there is, for example, this Mars One mission. Mm-hmm. There are apparently over 10,000 people who have inscribed themselves so they could participate in a one-way trip to Mars, which they would never be able to come back technically. Technology is not right for that. And they're basically accepting to leave this Earth and die somewhere between Earth and Mars, I suppose, because I don't think they will ever get there. But they still want to do it. They are very eager to do it. So
they're all heroes.
Yes. Yeah. So I was thinking maybe this thing of being a hero and discoveries, like it reminds me a bit of in the old times with the ship when they discovered America, Christopher Columbus. This all sounds very adventurous, exciting. Rewarding, so is that maybe a reason why somebody like Stephen Hawking doesn't like or doesn't see the dangers that science also poses always?
No, I'm not sure. I think he is so deeply imbued in the techniques, scientific techniques, that he is a master of, that he cannot doubt these techniques. And it's it is general relativity, which is the most, maybe the most difficult mathematical version of theoretical physics.
Yeah.
And very few people manage to get good exams good enough to have a career in that area.
I see.
So it combines the highest level of mathematics, which is hard to achieve, with the highest level of physics, which is a science. So it's two kinds of genius that you need to be accepted in that community. So the whole community believes it is a sacred community. And therefore it is very hard to avoid a consensus in such a community.
But we all agree that, for example, the atom bomb, just to take one example, was a scientific discovery, in itself not bad, not good, but then was used for the bad.
Yeah, and Einstein thought would need it as a deterrent, and then it was suddenly used against his will.
Yeah.
And he felt betrayed on the one hand, but also responsible because it was his brainchild.
Yeah.
So he was the first victim, besides the people who were killed by the bomb.
Okay. But now your main theory also, or your theory about the CERN LHC, is that a stable black hole would be produced?
Now that's not my idea, that is CERN's claim.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I can agree that sounds reasonable.
Who is that somewhat, if I may ask?
Sorry? Yeah?
You said somewhat's claim?
No, CERN.
CERN's claim, yes, exactly. They say they will produce, but they say...
They want to produce it, yes.
But they say they won't be stable.
Exactly. So they think it would be wonderful to produce them because they will immediately Hawking radiate, as is the term. So Hawking found the radiation in his equations.
Okay.
And this equation is the real safeguard or the real guarantee that CERN has with a signature from Hawking that this is not dangerous. And so this is the deepest...
Yes, true, I remember that.
And the whole world, CERN was claiming in the last safety report that let's assume Hawking radiation did not exist, would then be there some danger, which sounds very fair. But everybody knew in his background, in his mind, of course, Hawking radiation does exist, so we are safe.
Okay,
so
that sounds to me like I would believe in ferries, and I would speed up with my Ferrari to 350 and say, I'm absolutely sure that when the wall comes, there will be this guardian angel fairy coming and she will save me. Yeah. It sounds a bit like that.
Exactly, yes. It is a medieval phenomenon.
Okay.
But at the same time, it's a consensus type phenomenon, and there's a science. It's a science called sociology, which deals with such phenomena.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to explain that when very, very many people have made a consensus, it is very, very hard to lick against this consensus. Even if you have hard evidence, it will take 30 years, Max Planck said, until the old generation of scientists has died out before the new truth can become accepted, even if it's 30 years old.
Do you think humanity has 30 years left?
I hope so, yes. I mean, some people think it's less. Even Stephen Hawking sometimes talks bleakly about the future of humankind. He is one of the first people, actually, who seriously proposed to make space colonies, not just for the fun of it, but because this would be a way to guarantee the survival of humanity, of humankind. Yeah. So he is very deep. He is my ally. There are two Stephen Hawkings, so to speak. One is my closest friend and ally, and the other is CERN's ally. And these two somehow fit into one mind. And it would be great if we could together persuade Stephen Hawking to to talk once,
But this
in a atmosphere of friendship.
Yeah, but this idea of being able to colonize the universe,
Yeah.
when I look at the latest adventures of some companies who tried just to go to out of the Earth, what you say, the Earth sphere, they didn't even go to the moon. They just exploded. I mean, like, are we is the technology ready to populate the universe?
In principle, yes. And I mean, if one would really put much into such an effort, it would also create so much enthusiasm on the planet that it would finance itself, so to speak.
That's true.
So it would not be at the expense of the poor inhabitants of our planet, which is the majority.
So we have two options, Roessler. One is to build the LHC on the moon, or one is that all humanity leaves the Earth and we can continue.
Yeah, unfortunately, not all of humanity can leave it. It would only be a select few which would be chosen to leave it. So not many people would really profit.
I'm not 100% sure that would include me and you.
Not very likely.
Oh,
no.
That's good, nice to know.
Yeah.
That's nice to know.
But still, nothing is better than nothing at all. That's an old saying. And if, you see, the whole planet would die more happily if one could know that the tradition will not be entirely lost. It's like parents having children knowing they have to die, but their children can go on living.
Yes.
So the planet could have children in the future,
Yes.
which is very, very important.
Yes, I see. That brings me, I mean, you mentioned the word magic, and it brings me to one question. I mean, the CERN LHC and its, I think, Nobel Prize eager particle scientists remind me a bit of Goethe's poem The Zauberlehrling, or in English, the Sorcerer Apprentice.
Yeah.
You too?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a human condition. And it's, if you wish, it's a temptation if history provides such an opportunity for consensus building and doing something together in a big, very high-level scientific consensus.
Right.
And so
But maybe they cannot control what they're doing, like the sorcerer's apprentice. You know, his boss, the old sorcerer, he went out in the evening, he started to do some experiments, use some magic, and finally the whole castle was underwater, and he was completely panicked until the old sorcerer comes home,
Exactly,
and
yes.
with 2-3 words everything is calm again.
exactly, yes.
We have the power, like the sorcerer's apprentice had, to use some magic, because we know some books, we have some experience, but are we able to control it?
You put your finger on the right spot, I would say. And but all of what we discussed so far is still, how should I say, hypothetical.
Yes.
As if there were no evidence whether Hawking radiation exists or not.
Yes.
But if one has very hard evidence that it has been disproved, then suddenly it is not just a matter of probabilities or judgment or choosing between alternatives which both are not well known. It suddenly becomes a matter of choosing between something which is proven to be dangerous and leaving to do that. And this has happened unless one person on the planet can prove that the counter proof to Hawking radiation is false. And there's only one person who is gifted enough to do that after the publications that exist, and that is Stephen Hawking himself. So what we have here is, if you wish, not a battle between 10,000 scientists at CERN and a minority opinion, which happens to be the group that is centered around Tuebingen and some places in the US, like Hawaii. Hawaii was the first place where such thoughts emerged. But that looks like two tiny insects against a big lion. They have no chance.
I mean, the two U.S. scientists, Sancha and Wagner,
Yes.
they actually, their first action was not against the LHC in Geneva, but against the Hadron Collider in the U.S., no?
Yeah, the RIC, yes.
The RIC, which older and smaller apparently was. And at that time, I think also this older movie, The Black Hole, was produced, and it was more in reference to the U.S. Collider then. Is that a possibility? At least it was at the time that the U.S. Collider was still in function.
Yeah, right, yes.
Yeah.
And of course, I mean, nothing has happened so far with these old collision machines.
Yeah.
And so one could extrapolate that probably nothing will happen also in the future.
But that is a good point, Otto, because the CERN has, I mean, there is this huge tunnel, and in the tunnel they have this quite very, very big ALICE, they call it, and CMS. I mean, there are tools that allow data to be harnessed from these collisions.
Look like cathedrals.
They look like
very,
cathedrals.
very impressive.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Very impressive, exactly. And my question there is just, I read that from all the data that is produced during collisions, only 10% can actually be analyzed.
Much less.
Even less?
Yes.
How much do you think that is?
I have no precise estimate.
Okay,
but
it
it's
could be
much
1%, it could be
much
less. Yeah. Means that 99% or more of the data cannot be analyzed.
Yeah.
Means that if the interesting data happens to be in the part that is not analyzed, how can we know? How can we know if there's Hawking's radiation? How can we know if there's a black hole somewhere? Because we don't see it.
Yeah, but of course one could try to make it, and then maybe one will see it. That's the hope. That's the excuse. As long as one has no theory, what will happen if, first of the probability that they are being produced, that this probability can be shown to be much higher than so far. No, then CERN pretends to believe so at the moment, while at the beginning they believed it is high enough to build a machine. That was one of the reasons to build this beautiful machine. The Higgs boson was the secondary reason at the time. Now it was found, which is wonderful, but unfortunately Hawking radiation has not yet been found, so the main motivation is still going on, and CERN is playing this down. But in reality, the triumph for Hawking that is being expected is still the real motivation for the upgrade of CERN. And it somehow it's beautiful. A whole community is trying to prove that one ingenious individual was right. And this is an old myth also on the planet. It's a messianic type of thinking that is behind this, and Hawking is like almost like Jesus on the cross.
Could we? I mean, based on the know-how that most
he's a holy man. Yes.
Yeah, based on the know-how that most scientists at the CERN are actually atheists, as far as I know.
I doubt it.
You doubt it?
Yeah.
But I hear it so. But basically, what I want to ask is, what you're saying sounds nearly a bit religious. So can we still see the CERN LHC as a kind of religious tool in a certain way?
It's a spiritual tool.
Yeah.
Yes. So the planet has lost so much religion, except for the one of the three Abrahamic religions, about which people don't talk much at the moment, because it's too many.
The Spanish press is actually a bit critical with the CERN, I think, and they often used to call it the God machine in the articles. And I think this had a bit the feeling to me that they want to express that we're trying to play God with the machine.
Yeah, and the cathedral shows that it's related. It's like an Aztec myth. But the Aztec myths usually are misunderstood, as I recently learned. People were were sacrificed and the hearts were taken out and so on.
You mean they weren't such nice
It
beings
looks
as...
very cruel.
Yes.
But I recently learned the truth about this, which
me
no
too,
one
me
seems
too.
to know.
I know that.
Yeah.
I know that.
So in reality, these were self-sacrifices
Yeah.
to make sure that the next cycle of the universe gets started. So they were all Jesuses. So there's a very close parallelism between the old Aztec and I don't know exactly the names of the Indian tribes who had this religion. But it's a very, very Christian religion. And Christianity wiped out the real competitor in South America. And somehow this is also very moving, and one should not be critical of it. So the how do we say, the sobriety of scientific work, finding something new. In many rooms with many little isolated people, with many little computers, but not combined. That this type of science is still possible. And somehow it fell into oblivion. It is not true that 10,000 scientists are more intelligent than one scientist. It never was the case. But 10,000 scientists could start to discuss a new result with a so-called dissident, even if the dissident is not a dissident, but has results which are worthy of being taken seriously. But Hawking alone would be sufficient. I don't need 10,000.
Your last few sentences for me went a bit into the spiritual, into philosophical area, and this gives me a good intensive to show this book, because also you have been published in this book.
Yep.
As far as I understand, and Ali Sanaye, I hope I can say this more or less right, he published this book. It's called Chaotic Harmony, a dialogue about psychics, complexity and life, and it contains 25 interviews with you. And I understood from the content of the book that you are a person who is not just interested in one area of science, but you're more like a multidiscipline scientist.
Yeah, as I used
is that correct?
Yes, as I call it, I have no character in science. Yeah.
Do you think that a multidiscipline scientist is a better or a safer scientist because he takes different areas into account and gets the big picture better possibly? For example, in your last interview you mentioned that the medicine, when you became a doctor, you were asked to do remember me the exact name, the oath of the doctor profession.
The Hippocratic oath.
Exactly, yes. The Hippocratic oath. And you said it would be good if such a Hippocratic oath or something similar also went for particle scientists.
Yeah. And I once had the nice experience of flying from Santa Fe to Los Alamos, where it's nice when you fly there with a small plane, then suddenly you land without going down because Los Alamos is so high. But that was one surprise. The other surprise was my fellow travelers, about 5 only, very small plane, and they talked about weapons physics, the whole flight. And I realized how much they loved their topic. You see, weapons physics is a real branch of physics, and it's a very exciting branch. And Leonardo, is he? Yes, he was one of the first to be a very great designer of weapons for his government. So physics contains many sub-disciplines. And if the planet were already unified, if elections as they were instituted in South Africa by the greatest living saint that of memory I can think of, what was his name?
You talk about Mandela.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, he found a way to make sure that without changing the poverty ratio in his country, nonetheless democracy was introduced, which is nothing like that happened ever in the past.
Yeah.
But the same spirit can of course be used to make elections on the whole planet, with the same proviso that they won't improve your living standards very soon. There will be 50 years to wait.
Sure.
But nonetheless, you are allowed to vote.
Yeah.
There is now one country, one planet, without war. And there's no reason that in the time of the internet, no one talks about this. So the press that suppresses this possibility of instant democracy and instant peace.
Now, what you're saying, Otto, is very near of what the UN says, or something, an organization like that. So,
but they have no clout. You see, they are happy with having been given no clout, and they have to say thank you for the little bit. They're little monkeys, but monkeys are better than no monkeys at all, of course.
Yes, yes. Does that mean that, in your opinion, the time of the end of nations is arriving?
It has arrived a long time ago, yes. And Einstein was one of the people who proposed this. Mm-hmm. And Einstein and Mandela are very close.
Now I have to say that, I mean, we see that in the EU especially nowadays, that some people are afraid of this losing of nations. They become even more nationalistic in a way.
Yeah,
now you see that in Germany with Pegida, you see that in...
It doesn't matter,
countries.
yes. You see, that's the same thing in South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And there are, but nonetheless, they have agreed on a minimum of equality, in the rights at least, not in the possessions. But it makes a lot of difference. I was told that the young lawyers that are black and don't make money, nonetheless are much happier than their ancestors were, who also made no money, but they had also no titles. They had no dignity. And dignity...
Which Mandela was a lawyer at the outset, no?
Yeah. And somehow, I mean, you see, he was a smiler. And I have a big theory in the book called Smile Theory. And that's my real contribution to science. It's not my fight against the LHC. And
that's something Otto told me before when we were driving in the car, that most scientists never smile. And Einstein was one of the few scientists that smiled sometimes. And you also smile sometimes, but you told me that's only a kind of image preservation smile. because you were basically the bad man with the black hole.
No, I'm a child. You see, children are allowed to smile. Okay. People forgive children if they are smiling. It doesn't mean anything evil, even though adults might think of that.
Okay. And why? This is just a question, because you told me in a phone conversation we had, or an email conversation we had a few days ago. And why were you asked not to talk about the black holes or the dangers at the CERN LHC during these 25 interviews?
Yeah, it was because... first of all, to protect the interviewer.
So my interview is dangerous. Can I still live a few days after this interview?
And the other reason is that, of course, science is so beautiful that applications that border on suicide are a little bit a taboo topic.
Yes.
Even so, I was not unhappy not to be allowed to include dangers in a purely scientific context.
I see that.
And we don't have a purely scientific context here at the moment.
Yeah.
It is a little bit a political context.
Yes. Yeah.
And also a context of trying to generate friendship.
Yeah.
Science also does that. Mm-hmm. But science, okay, so there's not so much difference, I have to say. Yes.
Professor Roessler, Otto, were you always interested in science since you were a child?
Thank you. I started out with being interested in religion, I have to admit.
But you also studied theology.
Yeah, yes,
right?
For a few semesters I had two identities as a student, yes. And when I was still in high school, I was...
And did you also study just Christianity as religion, or also did you also touch on other religions?
I also touched on other religions, and something happened when I was 51 years old to my self-identity. I suddenly learned that I'm Jewish. I had been a Christian up to that moment, and I realized I can be both at the same time. But the deeper religion is the Jewish religion because it's older.
Did you read the Talmud?
I didn't read the whole Talmud, but I have it. I have a version of it.
Yeah.
And I, as a child, I remember meeting Martin Buber. Martin Buber is a very, is one of, like Mandela, is one of the people, or like Hawking, a very big topic.
Good.
One of my favorites.
This reminds me of something, because when I was like 12 years old, there was this movie by also a Jewish person, Steven Spielberg, Close Encounters of the Third Art, something like that. And this influenced me a lot, this movie, because there was this story, I think this family driving up a mountain, and on top of the mountain there were extraterrestrials, and they were doing big experiments and trying to communicate with them, and the whole setting of the movie, because before that many movies have just shown extraterrestrials as bad people trying to destroy us. And then Spielberg came along with this movie, and later on E.T., which was a bit on the lighter side of a bit more entertainment, but still the idea that some entity from some other planet could be nice, actually. I quite liked that. I was very impressed.
And also AI is a movie by Steven Spielberg.
Yes.
And I think it's an immortal movie again, and it's about immortality also. And Steven Spielberg is one of the biggest minds on the planet.
I think so. Yeah.
So we have a common, how should I say, criminal idea.
And I think like this here, because this interview, the type of interview this is really what I call an InterDoc. It's a bit a combination between a documentary and the interview, also a bit giving a bit background on you and on the history and on the surrounding of the subject. I think Steven Spielberg was also somebody who achieved well to connect entertainment and edutainment kind of thing. So, his movies are wise and at the same time very entertaining. So there are millions of people going to the cinema and going like, wow, this was a fun movie. At the same time, at least some of them are going quite deep into subjects.
You see, that's the secret of science. So I would call him a very big scientist. Otherwise he couldn't have done it.
That is a very, very good point. I mean, what is science actually? We were talking about Mandela, now we're talking about Spielberg. What is the definition of science, Otto? Who is a scientist and who is not? If I am discovering something while I'm cooking, and I'm doing this experiment with different ingredients, and I go like, I've never had such a fantastic taste before. Am I a scientist?
You see, the real scientists are the children.
Discovery.
And some of us are allowed to remain children and stupid. And only if you know you are stupid, you are as modest as a child is, and thereby you lose having to be afraid, strangely. I'm concerned about the fate of Putin at the moment. He disappeared, I was told.
Well, some people say his young new model wife was pregnant and got a new child in Lugano.
So let's hope
he would maybe sit on the lake of Lugano and sip some champagne and laugh about people being afraid.
And maybe we can win him over that he agrees to planetary elections. His voice might be able to get into the footsteps of Mandela. I mean, it's a chance.
Well, this is an interesting subject because in the Putin case, there are like two people, and one says Putin is a good guy, and the other says Putin is a nutcase.
I know, yes. It's like with Napoleon.
Yes.
And I always wondered why Napoleon and Goethe, the big poet, were so close. When Napoleon saw Goethe, he said, "Voilà un homme." So Napoleon was able to appreciate the most intelligent person of German tongue so far, apart from Einstein.
Well, isn't it that many powerful politicians, they border a bit on the craziness? It's a bit like,
they're not afraid.
Great visions, big ideas, but then it's quickly done, and you say like, yeah, I can do it all, right?
Yeah. They have no friends, you see. That's the real problem. Yes.
Well, Putin must have still some friends at the Secret Service, no? Or from his ex-work.
But you see, Snowden also is in this category of people, Secret Service people.
Yes.
And nonetheless, he's a hero.
Yes.
Also.
Yes. Well, again, this is a controversial subject. I was talking to ex-Secret Service people or ex-government people. They said to me, he is a traitor, he should be going to prison. And, of course, there are many people that say he's a hero. Yes.
It can happen, yes. That both definitions are true. And certainly Snowden would agree to having broken law.
Yeah,
in the interest of higher law.
Yes.
And so there's the question whether it's true that there are some things like human rights which would be above the law or not.
Yeah.
And of course nations cannot allow that because there are other nations and there might be war. And that might be deadly to do that. But as soon as we have the Mandela planet, suddenly it would no longer be dangerous to be a traitor like Snowden and be just a hero at the same time.
And there is actually, I think it's even somewhere in the US Constitution or law, but it's understood globally, I think, a bit that being a citizen in a country does not only always mean to follow orders, but sometimes it's also your duty to say no, or to say to become a whistleblower, or to work against orders. For example, if I imagine I would have been living in Germany during the Hitler time, and they would have asked me to shoot some people or gas some people. It would have been my obligation to say no, but it would have been against the law at the same time.
Absolutely, yes.
Against the current law.
Yeah, and of course one can also understand that singing the national anthem really has a very deep meaning, a religious meaning to the people. and so I understand both sides. I understand the people who criticize Snowden and find him to be a criminal, and people who say he belongs in the category you just described. And the United Nations could give him a status. They're not allowed yet to give any person such a status, as far as I know.
Yes.
But that would be the solution.
I was impressed. I recently watched a documentary done by Boitras, documentary filmmaker. She's living in New York, and this documentary won recently the Oscar at the film festival for the best documentary, and it is about Snowden, Citizenship 4 or something like that. And in this documentary, I mean also in other interviews, but in this documentary, which actually I can only recommend, is nice quality, Snowden says something like, and I did this for my country. So I mean, his point of view is I had to protect my country. So he still seems to be working in the mindset of a Secret Service employee. Only now he says what they're doing is against my country, because when you work for an organization like that, at some point you have to make a kind of oath and say, I will do everything to protect my country's interest.
Exactly.
And suddenly he seemed to be, for himself, realizing that what the NSA did was against the own country's or the public's interest. So in his view, he did this out of, loyalty for his own country.
Yeah, but you see, one can also say, as from the point of view of that country and government, that as long as this country is still being threatened by other countries, it cannot allow the luxury to people to think not patriotically. And so Snowden is really a citizen of the future, not of the present. And in the future, he has always been loyal to America, to the US, I'm sure.
That's a very nice to put it. A very nice way to put it out. I don't want to go too far into that area, but let's just maybe for 1-2 seconds discuss another person, Julian Assange, who is currently still a good 2 years at the Ecuadorian embassy in London, who I would also much like to interview in the next few months. Who now he was in a kind of legal trouble with Sweden because they said he raped somebody. Well, basically the definition of rape in that case is that he forced a woman to sleep with him without using condoms, which is in Sweden constitutes kind of statutory rape. And the point, just the thing I wanted to mention is that in the meantime, now Sweden always had said he needs to come out of the London embassy, come to Sweden. If not, we will not go forward with this. And now Sweden has agreed to send somebody to London and interview him concerning that complaint in the embassy. Which Assange must be quite relieved for this, because he is afraid that once he is in Sweden, Sweden will give him to the US and there he will spend the rest of his days in prison. What do you think about what Julian Assange has done, and what do you think about his current position?
I mean, he is obviously very close to Snowden, whom we discussed already.
Yeah.
And he's also a very charismatic person.
He is, yeah. I've met him in Geneva, and he is definitely a charismatic person, yes.
And his motivations are pure, I'm sure. And so I would pledge that he should also give him the status of a non-national on the planet, who is allowed to think of the interests of the bigger community, even though, again, it is true, he violated laws in one nation. And so it's very, as long as the planet is not ready to introduce the voting laws of Mandela, the planet is kind of responsible for the cruelty that is being done to such people.
Correct, yeah. Correct. Yeah.
And that people have the courage to be so Jesus-like, like Hawking again. It's very intimidating.
I mean, we also have to say that while Assange is in the embassy, another person which was very main person in WikiLeaks, Chelsea Manning, the soldier who has become a woman in the meantime, is imprisoned for, I think, over 30 years in a military prison. For the information he has leaked to WikiLeaks, or she has leaked to WikiLeaks. So I think this person is actually paying an even higher price.
Right.
Yeah.
And soon an American singer will come to Tübingen, the most famous one. What's his name?
The American singer?
Yeah, the most famous American singer.
Elvis Presley.
No, he's no longer alive. Yes, but I agree. I would agree with Elvis, but he's still living. Bob Dylan.
Bob Dylan. Yeah, Bob Dylan. In Modern Times is the last CD I heard from him.
Yeah.
Yes.
So this is the place where Bob Dylan will be singing soon, where we have this interview.
That's nice. I like that. I like that also. Going back to the CERN, I was recently working in Zurich, and a very good colleague of me, explained me, I wasn't talking with him about the CERN, I didn't mention one word, I swear, but this colleague suddenly said, you know, at the CERN, when they have important meetings, there's always a member of the US military present and a member of the US Secret Service of the CIA present at each meeting. Is that a surprise to you, Otto?
No, I mean, every country that has a certain dignity should have a Secret Service man there.
So the Swiss don't
They certainly have also.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Why? If I may ask, why?
No, I mean, the whole thing is too important.
But, I mean, for me it's a bit contradictory. You know, on one side the CERN says, no, we will never do anything that could in any way be used, I don't know, anything big, to make it small in a way. And on the other side, what could be interesting for the military and the Secret Service there? I don't get it.
No, it has been a military endeavor from the beginning. It was in the interest of both superpowers to have such a meeting ground where they could somehow hope to leak or get leaked information which could be decisive for survival of one of them. That was really, that was such. One doesn't understand anymore how close the planet was to mutual extinction at the time.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And it is, and there is one science called astronomy. And I was once told by a professional astronomer in a university that this science has every document on the internet. And it is well founded on the planet because every astronomical project is at the same time a military project. So it's wonderful to have astronomy, and it's wonderful that it helps the military, and it's wonderful to have CERN, and it's wonderful that it helps the military. But this is not an aggressive statement of mine. If anyone understands it in this way, I would take it back. It is natural, it is logical. One shouldn't be angry with people who love weapons physics. I like them. They're children. And you see, the nicest children, the nicest people to talk to is military people in times of peace. You realize they are really playful human beings. They are grown-up boys, grown-up little girls with courage. And so I love the military, as long as it doesn't become serious, as long as it's police-type game.
Yeah. Yes.
Police is I could love police. Even if they sometimes have to arrest someone.
Yes.
They don't have an evil spirit.
That is true. Yeah, I agree with that. It's a good statement. Otto, a few years ago, when we had the last interview, I believe it was just before the interview, there was this big media action about the CERN black holes because suddenly your theory or theorem became interesting to the media, and then there was a lot of reporting, and most media said tomorrow it will be the end of the world because Otto Roessler said so. And we both know that's completely wrong as a statement, but at the same time a 12-year-old girl in India has committed suicide because she was so afraid of the world being finished tomorrow. We both felt really bad during that interview about this action of her. What do you think are the reasons for the media to report false information in regard to the CERN?
They didn't report false information, they just reported truncated information.
Yes, very truncated.
Yeah. And this always can happen. It usually happens with the media. So that's a law of nature, that if the media gets something onto something, then it will be distorted in many ways, and you cannot prevent such things. But it is very, very sad, of course.
For me, Otto, just it felt a bit orchestrated because all the media outlets reported this, and At the same time, I also got a call from the Swiss TV that they want to do a discussion round on the CERN LHC, and I should be there at 6 o'clock in the afternoon, and 20 minutes before it started, they called and said it's cancelled.
Yeah. I had the same experience with the Swiss president. I was invited. It was cancelled. Actually, I was never told it was cancelled.
Who was the Swiss president at that time, just to tell
I took the freedom to forget his name. It was in 2008.
Was it Otto Stich? No,
in 2008, it's easy to find out.
Yeah, of course, yes. We should know, that's all, huh? We get a minus point for that. Yes. So in a way, how this thing developed with the media and all, I also found it a bit strange. You think there was
it's rational
pressure on people not to report certain things?
You see, it all depends on whether you believe that there is a theorem or not. And if the theorem has a small circle of people who have understood it, then it has no chance to... it's ridiculous. It's only in science that a ship's boy is allowed to say, I see an iceberg. In no other profession can you do that. And so the public doesn't know that such can happen. And it doesn't know that sometimes a ship's boy has to be taken seriously. There are professional ship's boys.
Yeah, that's true.
And
I
found better theorems in the meantime.
I would like to ask a bit of personal question, because I feel the years pass in my life. Some years have passed since I was at the last interview, and sometimes I've asked myself questions about how is it to get old. How does it feel to get old? How does it feel for you? You told me in the car, I think, or before we went to the car, you said to me, at the end of life, before we go, we still have this huge push of energy, it seems, and we look much younger than ever, kind of, because this seems to be happening to you. You look like a baby.
My friend Konrad Lorenz had a technical term for that. In German it is called Altersprachtkleid.
Wow, Altersprachtkleid. Das ist wirklich eine we need to think about that. Yes. We will make subtitles with the long word.
and if your memory is fading, you can have clearer thoughts, you see, because not so much is interfering.
That could be true. Yeah, I agree.
Also, you have not much to lose. You see, you can be benevolent, and people might even believe you.
Yes.
There's no reason to believe a younger person to be benevolent. He might have reasons, secondary reasons.
Yes.
Old people, if they're benevolent, okay, it might be a trick of theirs to be remembered nicely.
Yeah.
But actually, I think most old people are benevolent. Society doesn't know that. It forgot it.
That's true.
So old age doesn't have no dignity because people don't know anymore how kind people get when they are old.
Yes, because they get maybe less selfish.
Yeah.
They need to accept that life is limited in size.
They're not just stupid.
And
the only explanation to explain their stupidity is their kindness. And no one knows it. It's like with the young children. They are much, much kinder than the older children or the adults.
But traditional societies used often to have this kind of what they called Älterenrat, the Council of the Old or stuff like that.
Yeah.
And that doesn't exist anymore, right?
Yeah,
apart from the queens or the kings, maybe they are allowed to get old, and then sometimes somebody listens still to them.
Yeah.
But often old people nowadays, they go in horrible houses, and you let them die there.
Yeah.
No?
Yeah. They get into a machinery.
Yeah. Which again is a contradiction to, for example, Google's president or somebody there said yesterday that human beings are soon going to live 500 years. I don't know if that's true, but what would be the benefit of living 500 years if nobody wants you?
Yeah.
No?
Unless people realize that having had more experiences sometimes pays to be learned about by young people.
Yeah.
So young people can appreciate
Yeah.
older people, especially if they are honest about their deficits.
Absolutely, absolutely. I remember sitting in Basel at a tram station, and there was this really quiet old woman, and we started talking, and in 10 minutes she told me so many interesting things, and
Yeah, women
it needed a word from me, an incitation, because, sometimes these people are just afraid to talk. They say, I start to talk, and they will say, don't don't take my time away, got other things to do, and they themselves, they don't realize maybe anymore that they got something interesting to say.
Yeah, and if you have a profession like in the universities, one has the big luck that one has young people to talk to, and one can. So it is still possible to, if you don't use computers anymore, as I do, except for email, then you can compete with young minds, and you learn things
Now a very indiscreet question, Otto. How old are you?
I get 75 in 2 months' time.
And you're still working at the university?
Yeah.
How do you enjoy it to work with young people?
No, it's the greatest honor one can be given.
Or somebody else.
Okay.
Okay, but it happens quite often that people decide for some sickness or for some other situation in life that they don't want to continue. And I personally, my position there is it's everybody's free will.
Yeah, but I have a friend who is strongly advocating against signing that you don't want to be revived or so when you have a stroke or something, because he has many patients who had such a fate and who cannot talk anymore except to him, because he has the machines to do it, a machine like this one, so to speak, and he found out they want to live, but they cannot communicate.
Express it anymore.
Yeah, and then they have to listen how the relatives say he or she shouldn't suffer anymore, let it switch off, and they are crying now, and no one knows it except Niels Bierbaumer. He's a hero. He's a holy man in my eyes, because he saves people from being murdered successfully. And
I mean, this is again a very controversial subject. This whole we in Switzerland were quite open on this. Now we have these organizations like Dignitas or Exit, which allow people to finish off their life in certain situations. And we also got a quite heavy tourism coming to Switzerland. People, for example, from England come because they want to die with us. And of course, this is a controversial subject. I mean, also when we talk about anesthesia, is that correct?
English,
then I mean eugenics. It gets us reminded of certain historical facts, and the main question is then, will society come at the point where they will say, oh, these people at these elderly homes, they need to commit suicide now because they're too old and they're too expensive for society?
Aldous Huxley, Brave New World, has this already in it,
Exactly. So it's a controversial question, as another question which I think you talk about in the book Chaotic Harmony, which is, I think you talk about this one in your interviews also, it's about artificial intelligence, right? Can you tell us anything about this subject?
It's very kind of you to touch it. I had hoped it would come up, but I hadn't thought it would be possible.
It comes.
I have a method how to turn elephants into persons. And that would be artificial intelligence, but on the level of a superhuman intelligence. It would not be silicon. It could also be done with silicon later, but at the moment it could be done to date with elephants or with dolphins. Gottfried Meyer-Kress, a friend who unfortunately...
How would you do that, if I may ask?
Yeah, it's by by means of understanding my smile theory.
Okay.
So the smile theory is the most difficult theory I ever developed. It was also the first. No, it was the second. I should.
Tell me more about the smile theory also.
It's very dangerous.
Is it more dangerous than black holes at this time?
Yeah.
So there is something more dangerous than black
It's
holes.
dangerous in a good sense, you see.
I see. Well, black holes at the CERN are dangerous in bad sense.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Unless someone finds a counter theorem to mine.
Okay.
Which I hope. Yeah.
So what makes the theory of the smile so dangerous?
Because understanding love is dangerous. People are afraid of understanding love.
Because?
It's so close to religion.
And why would that be dangerous?
Yeah. I mean, when I was quite young, 17 or something, I thought I had to become a monk. Mm-hmm. But I didn't want to. I was afraid. Mm-hmm. So I had the call, so to speak, mm-hmm. and I was not strong enough to follow the call. I was quite grateful to my father for forbidding me to become a monk.
Well, I can imagine loneliness, no girls, no?
Yeah, but you see,
lots of praise all the time.
There's a lot of temptation in religion. It's the most tempting subject of all of them. People forgot that. They don't know anymore how sweet. I wouldn't call it a poison. but there is also an intelligence behind religion that is much deeper than scientific intelligence. And people know that. People wouldn't go to church if they didn't know. Of course, the numbers are declining, but some other churches are coming up.
Correct. Yeah.
So humankind is much more intelligent than its science. And the science is
But now I need to find the connection between
smile.
The theory of the smile and relations.
I forgot. Yeah. And children, young children, you see, children are nowadays a subject of sexual, how should I say, discussions.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks children and sexuality have something to do with each other. And very strange.
Mm-hmm, that's true.
But really, there is one species of humans called females. Now I'm saying something impossible. Sigmund Freud talked of the polymorphically perverse nature of the female. Mm-hmm. So females love children, you see. That's dangerous, and it gives them a kind of orgasm if they are breastfeeding. Mm-hmm. It's oxytocin. Oxytocin use is dangerous. There's a spray, you can get it, you know. People don't know it. It's nice to use oxytocin. But you love your friends more and you hate your enemies more if you take sorry.
Well, is this a company that is in the breastwork?
Yeah.
No. Yes?
Yeah, I mean, in the body of the woman, of the mother, and it's making the milk shoot.
Okay.
And it's also in orgasm. The main element is oxytocin.
That is very interesting. Oxytocin.
Oxytocin with a C.
Oxytocin. That would be the next Red Bull.
What is Red Bull?
It's a drink that gives you wings.
Yeah, it is. It always has been this Red Bull. Yes, yes.
The CERN LHC will be turned on again, as you mentioned before, sometimes in May, I think, this year. More powerful than ever.
I know. It will be turned on this month, but the collisions will start in May, on 8th of May, yes.
What feeling do you have about this?
No, I'm still optimistic. I believe that CERN will realize that there is an atmosphere of mutual benevolence in which one could discuss the safety of the LHC. And I got an offer from CERN young scientists in 2010 in January, or was it February, to give a talk before them. And then I got a letter from the boss of CERN that he does not allow this talk to take place.
You still have that letter, may I ask?
On email. I should have it somewhere, yes.
If you can send that to me, I would like to present it. Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Do you know who's the leader, by chance, of these young scientists?
No, I didn't know. I was. I had visited CERN. I was standing at the bus station waiting to leave.
In Mera, Geneva, yeah.
Yeah, I was allowed to see the machine and so on.
The tunnel.
Yeah. And a young man was standing there, and we came into a discussion, and he was a member of the CERN Young Scientists. He invited me for a talk. I found it interesting, and I got this official invitation.
I remember when I was living,
maybe, yes.
When I was living in Geneva with my daughter sometimes couldn't sleep because there was this hum. We actually found out later that we lived straight above the tunnel, and
you are one of the few people on the planet who lived right.
That's what made me impressed in the CERN. This hum, I was like, what is this? And a few years later, I went to Geneva, and there was a restaurant. I was talking with somebody about that, and there were two children present, and they instantly said, "Yeah, I have that too, and you can hear that too. What's that?"
Yeah. Oh, you need very fine ears. Yes, nice. Yeah, and children are, of course, quite different than adults. People forgot that.
Absolutely.
They are the higher human species. I used to say, with Konrad Lorenz's approval, that in 1,000 years, now he said Walt Disney will be the most famous artist in 1,000 years, and children will be much higher than adults in the hierarchy, and rightly so.
That's an interesting point.
But the smile was the topic. The smile has two meanings. It means friendly smile, or you see,
or the mad scientist smile.
And happy smile. Yeah, and happiness. And of course, if the scientist is wrongly happy for wrong reasons, it's also a smile, and then it's dangerous. Yeah. Yes, maybe my smile is dangerous.
I believe if you have seen also the movie Roger Rabbit, by chance. No, it's a drawn movie, let's say a comics movie, and there's this scene where Roger Rabbit, there is this mad scientist who I think he has had some bad experiences with cartoon characters, and now he wants to eliminate all cartoon characters, and he has this big pot, huge pot with some grey-greenish fluid, and if you draw a cartoon character into that pot, it dissolves completely. And so there's this key scene in the movie where he tries to put Roger Rabbit and his girlfriend with huge boobs in that pot. And he has this very special smile on his face while he does that, and his eyes, which go round in circles like, hypnosis eyes. And this reminds me of my theory.
So we always Roger Rabbit, you said.
Roger Rabbit. It's actually quite a nice movie. Everybody is so ecological today and green.
Yeah.
That the CERN consumes the same energy than half the city of Geneva. We're talking quite a big city. Geneva is quite a big city. When in operation, does not seem to generate any discussions. How can you explain this?
No, that's natural. People living near the Vesuvius mountain will also not discuss eruptions.
But they could say, why are we driving bicycles, and why are we using public transport, and why are we putting our waste in the right box, and the CERN can consume so much energy.
Yeah. But as soon as there's no proof that what CERN is doing is dangerous, one cannot object to it. And I have this proof, but I want this proof to be checked. And this is, and the proof is easy, but unfortunately the proof goes back to Einstein 1907. So it digs deeply into a version of Einstein that most specialists are not aware of anymore, because this is not part of the canon. But it's very easy to explain.
I got a call from ProSieben. This is a big German TV channel, and they want to publish excerpts of my interview with Gabriele Schroeter in a science medium they have called Galileo.
Galileo is a very nice science
Yes.
medium.
Yeah.
The people there are very devoted. Wonderful.
Exactly.
Yes.
And so there seems to be increased media interest again on the CERN LHC.
Yeah.
Automatically. Why do you think so?
Yeah, I mean, this is part of CERN's effort to get more visibility. And so CERN is paying for this criticism towards CERN because it raises the level of consciousness in the public.
Why don't they pay us then?
No, that's not the way journalists are being treated.
Okay, sorry to you. I'm sorry to you. The CERN LHC is not only the largest machine ever built by humankind, but also the most expensive one. Financed mainly by European nations and of course by European taxpayers. In these times of economical crisis, don't you find it surprising that the CERN gets his funding, no questions asked?
No, we talked about this already. CERN is basically a military project. But
even the military doesn't get all they ask for.
But the military is, of course, a very benevolent organization. It is funding, how do you call it, this fundamental physics type stuff, in the hope that something might also fall off from this research.
Which then might fall off on the military companies,
Precisely,
which then might make a lot of money with it.
I wonder how many Chinese are allowed to be members of CERN.
You think not many?
I'm afraid so, yes. That's just something I wondered, a question that came to my mind this morning.
Yeah, the Chinese seem to be more welcome when they produce computers and stuff like that than to really play as big players in the world's political strategies or scientific strategies.
But it's interesting, and I have a new theory, not about a smile. I come back to the smile in a minute. But I have a theory called cryodynamics. Cryo means cold, dynamics means dynamics. So it's the opposite to thermodynamics. Thermodynamics exists for 150 years as a wonderful theory. Cryodynamics exists for 10 years as an equally wonderful theory. It's essentially the same theory, only with a gas theory. Thermodynamics is when particles are repelling each other, and cryodynamics is when the gas is mutually attracting. So cryodynamics is a theory of galaxies in the cosmos which are a gas of galaxies. And it turns out that suddenly cryodynamics explains the redshift of the Hubble law. So the Big Bang is suddenly gone. Which actually I plan not to mention today.
Because if we mention everything, our interview may just take about 250 years, which would be nice for us. Maybe we'll survive those 250 years just because we're having so much fun. But for any listeners to this interview, it would maybe a bit lengthy. They would maybe tell us we have overdone it. Yes.
Maybe we have.
Maybe we have already. Who knows?
Shall I say one more word about the smile?
Yes.
Because I almost killed it. The smile in humans has two meanings. It means friendliness and it means happiness. And if you're happy, others might laugh, but it doesn't mean they like you. But if you are smiling in a friendly way, and someone will be offended that you smile at him. But if the smile is really moving enough, he will smile back, and suddenly you are friends.
There's a connection.
So the smile is a rewarding, bonding type signal.
Absolutely.
And it also has the signal of just pure happiness. There's a word for that in English.
Bliss.
Or friskiness, which is more silly, so to speak. Silliness.
Friskiness.
Laughing, yes. And so this feature of the human smile is shared by only one other animal.
And maybe the particles at the LHC are also in a friskiness feeling when they collide.
This is too difficult for me to touch or to understand, but it is one of the deepest questions I was ever asked at the same time. Because who knows? I mean, I recently read this book about Dirac, the strangest man, who saw another reality with the Dirac sea, so to speak. And so we never know if someone turns the world around totally enough. It ceases to be ridiculous and becomes deep.
Yes, agreed. I think this is a big...
But I come back to the smile.
Yes.
There's only one animal which has the same structure as the human face. That's the rear part of the dog. The tail wagging of the dog means happiness, friskiness, and if the dog likes you, it comes. It's not only happy, it's also showing it loves you. So between wolves, the tail wagging means both showing good spirits and bonding. So the wolf has just the same structure with the back part of its body as humans have with the front part of their bodies. But that's why they are the best friend of humans, the dog. But no other animal has this coupling. And why? And I claim that this coupling is responsible for a child being turned into a person for losing autism as a young age, 1.5 or so, before one remembers. And why then don't dogs or wolves become persons if they have the same misunderstanding? And if one thinks about it, if both mother and child are rewarded by the smile or the laughter of the other, they start to get more of that reward, and by giving. So the child suddenly feeds the mother, and the mother is moved in her heart and laughs, and the child realizes the mother misunderstands. I was just playing, but she's so. She thinks it's serious that I give her the sweet, and the child gives her the sweet eventually, but after a while, and then this is benevolence. So the child has the suspicion of benevolence and gives the mother. So the giving, only humans give. No other animal gives. They feed and such on, but never give. And they realize if you like something, they would never give it away. They would keep it more if you are interested.
And but that is dangerous. Sharing is dangerous.
Yeah, only humans share.
Yeah.
And if you know this structure of the smile, you can treat autism. Autism are people who are smile blind. Yeah. They look at the face. They are not realize that the smile means anything.
Correct.
They
can't interpret it. No?
Exactly.
No.
But I once watched a movie, a report, where a hairdresser, a person who works in a hairdresser shop, talked about how he had been an autistic child when he walked with his parents at the strand, at the sea, near the sea. He was just looking at the shadow of their parents in the sand, his parents in the sand, how the shape changed. Had no interest in the persons. But when he was 7 years old, he was sitting on his mother's lap, and she was showing him how to write. And whenever he succeeded in writing the right letter, she was acoustically so happy. She was rewarding him in the same way as other people are rewarded by the smile of the mother. And then he lost autism. He was not autistic anymore.
Because he understood.
Yeah. So we can use this as a therapy for autism. No one uses it on the planet. And one can use it as a therapy for the autism of an elephant, of a young elephant. Because animals are autists, by definition. Only humans are non-autistic. But if you know this trick, you can turn an elephant into a more intelligent discussion partner and scientist.
I like your smile theory.
Thank you. You are the first.
I am not a scientist. I'm a journalist.
You are a specialist for non-specialization.
Yeah. Gabriela Schroeder is not a scientist, but a citizen.
And
You, Professor
a nurse. Yeah.
Otto, you are a scientist, but you're not a particle scientist.
Exactly.
Does the CERN staff think we should just all shut up and behave and let them do their stuff and that's it?
Yeah. I'm sure. But I'm not only an amateur particle scientist, I'm also an amateur relativity physicist, and I'm an amateur thermodynamics physicist. I discovered cryogenics. It can be used to make cheap energy in not in colliders, but in another type of
machines,
big machine, which costs even more than CERN actually. And this machine can be controlled by cryogenics so that it can safely produce hot plasma fusion.
That sounds good.
But even China is not interested in that at the moment, which shows to me that China is much closer to Western thinking than people think, because they even don't believe big progress if CERN doesn't believe it.
That's a good point.
But CERN doesn't know about this. Yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah.
But now I said enough crazy things.
One point I wanted to make is I've in preparation of this interview, I've read a bit of articles and other stuff, and also looked at your German Wikipedia page about you, and it says there that you're in a major legal dispute with this university visiting since over 20 years. And I was quite surprised what such a paragraph would do in Wikipedia. I mean, it would be like they would write something about me in Wikipedia, which I'm luckily not yet have a page for me, and they would say, when he was 10 years old, he stole a piece of bread from somewhere, or he drove without a ticket in the bus. I mean, do you have an idea why somebody could be interested in putting such information in Wikipedia?
Yeah, I mean, one is helpless against any information that is distributed.
Yeah.
And no, I mean, I would be grateful if someone could remove it, but that's all that I can reply. It is not true. Also, it is not true that I ever did anything illegal, but it is true that the Minister of Science of this local government here, Baden-Württemberg, ordered me to go into a closed psychiatric clinic, and I refused. And I never went there, but I had to wait at home once, because the newspaper said today on that day they will come to fetch you. And a colleague of mine had gone there, and he's later committed suicide. And it was because new laws had been introduced in Germany.
This is actually a very sad subject. I mean, because we talked about this when we had the break in this interview about how society tries to place people that they see as critical of something they don't want to be criticized in institutions like that.
Yeah, but at that time I hadn't criticized anything, strangely. Only there was a new law which said that professors can be forced to change their field for which they had been gotten a so-called call, as it was called. So being uncalled and getting a new call against your will. And this happened to me, and I didn't say no. I just said yes, if I have to, I do it, but I tell the students. And because I told the students that this was an involuntary lecture in a field which I had never studied and had never published in, it would be an experiment we do together. And I said we will fly this plane, which I had never flown, and we will land this plane, which means I will also take the exams I have to take from you, but together we can do it. And then they took it away. So I was not allowed to make this experiment, which I would have enjoyed, even though it took a lot of nerves, to be so honest. But that was the reason I was declared an enemy of the state.
Yes, yes. Otto, if you could have a wish concerning the CERN LHC, what would you wish for right now?
I'm so grateful for you to ask this question. You see, usually only angels do that.
I don't know if I am.
Who knows? That I may be allowed to give this talk before the CERN young scientists.
Okay. Well, I wish for that too, Otto, and I thank you very much for that interview.
I appreciate very much the kind atmosphere in which you imbued me so that I made all the mistakes I could possibly make. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you too, Otto. Ich werde jetzt das Mikrofon ausschalten und die Kamera noch so ein bisschen im Logo so.
Die drei was?
Ja, sind so wie 3, 6.
Ach so, ja?
Ja. Das Zeichen des Teufels, so viele Leute. Also es gibt eine relativ große Symbolik dort drin. Eben, ja, eben gibt es auch Leute, die denken, das CERN sei eine Art böse Magie oder so. Es gibt relativ viele Meinungen. Und auch zu den Gefahren am CERN, es gibt ja nicht nur die Gefahr, also nicht nur deine Gefahr, die Schwarze Loch, dann gibt es auch diese Translates und was gibt es noch alles? Wie hieß der andere, der Journalist von den USA, der da sagt, es könnte explodieren oder sowas, das war seine Angst.
Louis Sancho?
Nein, nicht der, es war noch ein anderer, wo wir auch so Kontakt hatten eine Zeit lang. Der hat so kann mich nicht mehr an den Namen.
Nicht der Walter Wagner.
Nein. Bin auch nicht mehr sicher, ob er Ami oder England war. Aber der hat dann auch eben gedacht, es könnte explodieren. Und was der Hawkins sagt, ist auch nicht genau das Gleiche, oder? Er hat irgendwie das Universum ganz in zweifach oder sowas. Es gibt verschiedene mögliche.